The snow was coming sideways off Lake Superior the night my mother-in-law locked the door behind me with a 2-month-old in each of my arms. It was January 16th, a Friday, and the radio had been saying blizzard since noon. 14 inches, they said. Wind chill 30 below. In Two Harbors, Minnesota, that's not a storm you drive in. That's a storm you die in, if you're stupid enough to be out in it. And there I was on the front porch of a house I'd been told for 2 years was my home, in my socks, holding Elsie against my chest and Micah in the crook of my other arm, both of them screaming, and my prosthetic leg already going cold and stiff where the socket met what's left of me, below the knee. Behind me, through the glass of the storm door, my husband Trevor was standing in the front hall, not moving, not opening the door, just watching, the way you'd watch weather. And his mother, Lorraine, stood beside him with her arms crossed, and she'd already said the thing she came out to say. She'd said it in the voice she saves for church committees and for me. "My son needs a wife," she said, "not a wounded soldier." Then she reached past Trevor and turned the deadbolt. I heard it, that specific, final little sound, and the porch light went off. I stood there for a second, just a second. The snow was already collecting in Micah's blanket. I'm a combat medic. I was a combat medic. And there's a thing that happens in your body when the situation goes fully sideways, when panic would cost lives. Everything gets very quiet and very clear. And in that quiet, I did the math the way I was trained to. 2 infants, sub-zero, no car keys, no phone in my hand yet. Thank God I had it in my coat pocket. The nearest place with a roof I could actually get to on foot was 4 blocks down, on the corner of 7th and Waterfront, a diner, closed for the night. And I knew exactly who had the key, so I got both babies zipped inside my coat against my body heat, and I put my head down into that wind, and I walked. And when I got to that dark, locked diner, I made one phone call. 20 minutes later, a set of headlights came through the whiteout, and I want to tell you who was driving and what happened after, because it's the reason I'm sitting here today. But if I just tell you the ending, you'll miss the whole thing. You'll miss how a woman with no family of her own ended up with 2 families in one small town. One that gave everything to save me, and one that put me out in the snow. So let me back up. Let me tell you how I got to that porch. Before I do, one thing. There's a question I want you to sit with while you listen, and I'll ask it again at the end. Who's your 20 minutes later? Everybody's got a lowest night. The question is, who you can call from the bottom of it. Hold that. And if this channel is where you come for the ones who got back up, do me a favor and subscribe, so the next one finds you. Now, let me start where I actually start, which is with nobody at all. I grew up in the foster system in Minnesota. I'm not going to make a whole thing of it because it's not that kind of story, but you need the one fact that matters. I have no family, no mother waiting by a phone, no father, no siblings, no aunt with a spare room. I moved through 6 placements before I was 12, and I learned young not to unpack, not to get attached, not to let the ache of wanting people turn into hoping for them, because hope was the thing that actually hurt. I aged out at 18 with a garbage bag of clothes and no idea what a person does next. And what this person did next was walk into a recruiter's office in Duluth in the fall of 2011, 3 weeks after my birthday, because the Army was the only place I could find that offered a bed, a paycheck, and the one thing I'd never had, which was people who were required to come back for you. I became a combat medic, a 68 whiskey, if you know the number, and I was good at it. For the first time in my life, I was good at something that mattered, and people counted on me, and I found out that being needed felt a lot like being loved, and I didn't yet know those 2 things weren't the same. That confusion would cost me later, at a different address, but back then it just made me a very good medic. I'd found my people. Soldiers are family to each other in a way that's hard to explain to civilians. You eat out of the same cans, you're bored and scared in the same rooms, and when it goes bad, you go into it for each other without a second's thought. By 2014, I was a sergeant with a deployment under me, and I could start an IV in the dark, in the cold, with my hands shaking, and I did, more times than I want to count. And then there was the morning that took my leg. I'll tell it plain because the people who've been there don't need it dressed up, and the people who haven't can't be made to feel it anyway. We were at a small outpost, mid-morning, clear sky, the kind of ordinary you learn to distrust. I was in the aid station, really just a reinforced room with a table and my kid. When the first rocket came in, then the second, indirect fire, walking across the compound in a line, each one a little closer, and you can hear it walking toward you, and there is nothing on this earth you can do to make it stop. There was a soldier on my table, a 19-year-old named Eli Sorensen from right here in Two Harbors, though I didn't know that yet. I just knew he had a bad leg wound from a patrol earlier, and I had my hands inside it trying to stop him from bleeding out. When the third round hit close enough to shower grit through the doorway, the smart thing, the trained thing, is to get low and get cover. And I did get low. I just got low over Eli instead of away from him, because you do not leave a patient on a table. That is the one rule under all the other rules. And the next round came through the wall. I don't remember the sound. People always ask about the sound. I remember before, and I remember after. And in between, there's just a white space my brain has never given back. When the after started, it started in pieces. Dust, a high ringing, someone shouting my name from very far away. Eli was alive under me, still breathing, and I remember being glad about that before I understood anything about myself. And then I tried to move and couldn't feel my left foot, and I looked down, medic that I am, already assessing, and there wasn't a foot to feel. Below the knee was gone. I remember being very calm about it, which is shock, and I remember telling the soldiers who reached us to work on Eli first, which they didn't listen to, and I remember thinking, with a strange flat clarity, well, that's that leg then. Eli lived. He walked out of that war on the leg I'd bought him with mine, and he came home to Two Harbors to his mom and dad and his little brother and his whole big Sorensen family, and I came home to nobody. They gave me a Purple Heart for it, which is automatic when you bleed for the country, and they gave me a Medal for Valor for staying on the table, which felt strange to accept because I hadn't decided anything. You don't decide. Your training decides for you. Your body just does the thing you drilled 10,000 times. I spent almost 2 years after that at a military medical center learning to walk again on a prosthetic. And I'll be honest with you about that time because it's the part nobody films. It was ugly. Learning to walk again as an adult is a humiliation you have to swallow every single day. Your residual limb changes shape for months as it heals, so your socket never fits right, and it rubs and blisters and screams. There's phantom pain. My missing foot would cramp, would burn, would itch, and there's nothing to scratch. The first time I stood on the prosthetic and took a step and fell flat on the mat in front of a room of other broken soldiers, I cried. And a triple amputee 2 mats over named Ramirez looked at me and said, "Yeah, it sucks. Get up." And I got up, because get up turned out to be the only prayer that ever worked for me. I went through what the Army calls a medical evaluation board and then a physical evaluation board, which is the long, paperwork-heavy road to being medically retired. And at the end of it, at 24 years old, I was a civilian with a prosthetic leg, a modest disability check from the VA every month, and absolutely no one and nowhere to go. Except Eli Sorensen would not let that stand. Here's the thing about the family I saved my way into. While I was still in the hospital, months into it, Eli's parents drove down to see me. Not once. Over and over, hundreds of miles each way. A whole day of driving to sit with a stranger their son had told them about. Gus Sorensen, Eli's dad, is a big, quiet man who owns a diner and runs a plow and tow operation on the side. The kind of man who fixes things instead of talking about them. Marnie, Eli's mom, is the opposite. She talks. She feeds you, she cries easily and isn't ashamed of it. The first time Marnie met me in that hospital hallway, she took my face in both her hands and said, "You're the one. You're the girl who gave us our boy back." And then she just held on. And I, who had spent 18 years learning not to need anybody, who had made an art form out of not being held, stood in that hallway and let a stranger hold my face, and I fell apart in front of her, and she didn't let go, and she didn't tell me it was okay, she just held on until I was done. Marnie came back every few weeks after that. She brought me a quilt she'd made. She brought me caramel rolls in a tin. She started signing her cards, "Mom, if you'll have me." I have those cards still. When I got out, I had nowhere to be. So Gus and Marnie did the only thing that made sense to them. They brought me home, to 2 Harbors, to a spare room over the diner, and then to a little rental down the street. They made me family the way you'd think family is supposed to work, but almost never does. No conditions, no ledger, no reminding you what you owed. Gus built me a set of steps with a rail on the side of my rental without being asked, one Saturday, because he'd noticed the old ones iced up. I got a job at the diner first, learning the tables, and Gus taught me the tow truck and the plow on winter nights just so I'd have another skill in my pocket. And then I took some courses and started working as a medical assistant at the little clinic in town. Back in medicine, back to being useful, which is the only way I've ever known how to feel whole. I learned to love this place, the big cold lake, the lighthouse, the oar boats, the way the whole town shuts down and pulls together when the weather turns and nobody has to be asked. For the first time in my life, I had a home and a table with my name on a chair and a woman who signed her cards, Mom. I should have known that being that grateful, that starved for family, would eventually walk me into the exact wrong door. Because a few years into my new life, I met Trevor Kessler, and Trevor came with a mother. I met Trevor in 2021 at the hardware store, of all places. I was buying a part to fix the clinic's back gate myself because I'm my father's daughter, except I never had a father. So I'm nobody's daughter, and I fix my own gates. Trevor worked there. He was easy to talk to, gentle, a little unsure of himself in a way I read as sweetness. He helped me find the right hinge and then walked out to the parking lot and said, kinda shy, that he'd noticed me in there before and would I ever want to get dinner. On our 3rd date, I told him about the leg because I always tell people early. It's not a secret. It's a fact, and I'd rather know right away who can handle a fact and who can't. Trevor handled it fine. Better than fine. He said, "That's the most impressive thing anyone's ever told me at a dinner table." And I believed he meant it. I think he did mean it. And in those early days, he did the things that made me trust him. He read about prosthetics on his own, without me asking, so he'd understand. When my limb was acting up one night, he ran me a warm bath and didn't make it weird. He came to the diner and let Gus grill him and passed. Trevor's problem was never that he didn't mean things. Trevor's problem was that he could not hold on to the things he meant when his mother was in the room, but I didn't know that yet. In 2021, all I saw was a soft-spoken man who thought my worst wound was the most impressive thing about me, and after a lifetime of nobody, I fell hard. We married in the summer of 2022. I was 30. The Sorensens threw the reception at the diner, and Gus walked me down the aisle because there was no one else and I wanted him to, and he cried the whole way. This enormous man just weeping into his good suit. It was one of the best days of my life. Marnie kept saying, "Our Sadie's getting married," like I was hers, and in every way that counts, I was. Lorraine Kessler did not cry at my wedding. Lorraine sat in the front row with her mouth in a straight line and her hands folded, and later, I heard from someone who overheard her that she told a friend the whole thing was a bit much for a girl with no people. A girl with no people. That was how she saw me from the start, and I spent the next 3 years learning exactly what that meant. Let me be fair to Lorraine, as fair as I can be because I've had a lot of time to think about it, and cheap villains are boring and untrue. Lorraine's husband died young, when Trevor was still a boy. Trevor was her only child. And somewhere in her grief, she decided that Trevor was the one thing in the world that belonged to her completely. And she built her entire self around owning him. Every choice he made that didn't run through her felt like a theft. She wasn't cruel because she was evil. She was cruel because she was terrified. And the thing she was most terrified of was a woman who might love her son enough to take him somewhere she couldn't follow. But understanding a thing doesn't mean it stops cutting. And Lorraine cut in a very particular way that I want to name for you, because some of you are living with a version of her right now. She never attacked me directly. Not at first. She did it the way water does a stone. A comment here. A raised eyebrow there. When Trevor and I would come for Sunday dinner, she'd serve everyone and then glance at my leg. I usually wore pants, but she knew. And she'd say something like, "I just don't know how Trevor manages with everything." As if I were a burden he was heroically carrying. When I mentioned my work at the clinic, she'd say, "That's nice, dear, keeping busy," in the tone you'd use about a hobby. There was a Christmas, our first married one, where she gave Trevor's cousins these thoughtful, expensive gifts and gave me a gift card to a shoe store. And when I opened it, she smiled and said, "I wasn't sure what to do about shoes in your situation." To the whole room, and everyone got quiet, and I said thank you. Because what else do you say? And I went to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub for 5 minutes and then came back out smiling. That was the game. It was never an insult you could hold up and point at. It was 1,000 tiny cuts, each one deniable, each one leaving me the crazy one if I flinched. And when the topic of my service came up, which was rarely because I don't lead with it, she would physically change the subject, actually turn her body away, because a wounded veteran daughter-in-law did not fit the picture Lorraine wanted to show her friends. She once told me, and I quote, that she'd prefer I not mention the army thing at her garden club because people get uncomfortable and it's a bit of a downer. The army thing. My leg was a downer at the garden club. And slowly, the way it always goes, she worked on the seams between me and the Sorensens. You spend an awful lot of time at that diner. Don't you think it's a little strange, a grown woman so attached to another family? You're a Kessler now. Trevor never said these things. Trevor just never contradicted them. And silence from the person who's supposed to defend you is its own kind of answer. And I, God help me, wanting so badly for my marriage to work, wanting to be a good wife, wanting to belong to yet another family, after a lifetime of belonging to none, started going to the diner less. Started saying no to Marnie's Sunday breakfasts, started making excuses, started shrinking, 1 inch at a time, into the shape Lorraine had cut for me. By the time I got pregnant, I'd let her wall me off from the only real family I'd ever had. Marnie would call, and I'd let it go to voicemail and text back that things were busy. That's the part I'm least proud of. Not the leg, not the war, not the divorce. That. I let her take the Sorensens from me, one polite comment at a time, and I did the walling myself, from the inside, which is the cruelest trick these people pull. They get you to build your own cage and thank them for the lumber. Then I got pregnant, and not with 1 baby, with 2. I found out it was twins at the 20-week scan, and Trevor cried in the parking lot, the good kind, and for about a month it was wonderful, the old Trevor, the hardware store Trevor. And then Lorraine got involved, and everything I'd feared clicked into place, because twins meant I would need help. And Lorraine saw, in that need, the opening she'd been waiting 3 years for. "You'll move in with me," she announced. Not asked. Announced at a Sunday dinner before I'd even finished my 3rd trimester. The house is big. I raised a child in it, and Sadie's going to need a lot of help she frankly can't manage on her own, in her condition. Her condition. She always found a way to make my body the problem, to fold my pregnancy and my leg into one big proof that I couldn't do this without her. Trevor thought it was a wonderful idea. His mother's big house, no rent, built-in help, and I said no. I said it clearly. I said we'd figure it out ourselves, in our own little place, like the Sorensens had figured out everything with far less. And I got overruled the way I always got overruled, not with a fight, but with a slow, grinding campaign. Lorraine and Trevor wearing me down over weeks until saying no cost more energy than I had left while carrying 2 babies. Every conversation came back to it. Every worry got answered with, "Which is why you should just move in." So we moved into Lorraine's house on 3rd Avenue in October, and I walked, 8 months pregnant, on a leg and a half, straight into the trap I'd seen coming for 3 years and been too tired to stop. The twins came in November. Elsie first, then Micah, 4 minutes apart, both small and perfect and absolutely furious at the world. And those first weeks were the hardest of my life. Harder than the war, and I've thought a lot about why. In the war, the exhaustion had comrades in it. You suffered next to people. This exhaustion I faced alone, in a house that wasn't mine, under the eye of a woman who watched me struggle and narrated it like a nature documentary. Because that's what Lorraine did. Newborn twins don't sleep, and a mother of newborn twins doesn't sleep, and a mother of newborn twins with one leg who is being critiqued around the clock comes apart at the seams. Lorraine had opinions on how I held them, fed them, soothed them. A real mother would know to, was how a lot of her sentences started. There was a night, maybe 3 a.m, both babies screaming, and I was trying to get down the stairs with Micah because my limb was so swollen my socket wouldn't seat right. That happens. Your limb changes size day to day, and after weeks with no sleep and no time to care for it properly, mine was a mess. And I was going down those stairs slow and careful with a screaming newborn, and Lorraine came out of her room and stood at the top and watched me and sighed and said, "This is exactly what I was afraid of. Not can I help? Not let me take him. This is exactly what I was afraid of." And Trevor, my husband, the baby's father, lay in bed down the hall and let his mother say it, because crossing her had never once in his 35 years seemed worth the trouble it would cost him. I stood at the bottom of those stairs with my son, and I understood fully for the first time that I was more alone in that full house than I'd ever been in an empty one. Let me stop for 1 second, because if you've made it this far, maybe you're the person I'm describing. Maybe you're the one being slowly convinced you're the problem in your own home by someone who benefits from you believing it. Stay with me, because the night everything broke is coming, and so is the truck in the snow, and I need you to see how a person finally stops shrinking. If that's you, hit subscribe now, because the next few minutes are the whole reason I tell these. Okay, the night of January 16th. It had been building for days. The babies had colic that week, both of them, which if you've never lived through it is a special kind of hell. Hours of inconsolable screaming that nothing fixes, that makes you feel like you're failing at the one thing you're supposed to be built for. I hadn't slept more than 90 minutes at a stretch in 3 days. My limb was swollen and raw, and I hadn't had a spare hour to tend to it. And Lorraine had been escalating, because my visible exhaustion fed something in her, some proof that she'd been right about me all along. That afternoon I'd done something small. I'd called Marnie Sorensen. First time in months. I was so tired and so lonely that I broke through my own shrinking, and I called the woman who once held my face in a hospital hallway and signed her cards, Mom, and I said, "I miss you." And I cried, and Marnie said, "You come by any time, baby. Bring those babies. This family's been waiting for you." And I decided, sitting there on the edge of a bed in Lorraine's house, that the next day I was going to bundle up my kids and take them to the diner and let my real family finally meet them. It was the first decision I'd made for myself in 3 years, and it felt like coming up for air. I made the mistake of saying it out loud, at dinner. I said, simple as anything, "Tomorrow I'm taking the twins to meet the Sorensens." And Lorraine set down her fork, and I watched her face do the thing it does. And she said, "Absolutely not. Those people are not this family. You are not parading my grandchildren around that greasy diner for those people to coo over." And something in me, 3 years and 3 days without sleep and 1 saved life and 1 lost leg deep, finally said no back. I said, "They're not your grandchildren to keep from anyone, and the Sorensens have been more my family than this house has ever tried to be." The room went silent. Trevor stared at his plate like it might save him, and Lorraine stood up slowly, and I saw that I had finally done the unforgivable thing, which was not to defy her exactly, but to say the true thing out loud at her own table, that some other family had loved me better than she was capable of loving anyone, that I had seen the real thing, so I knew hers was a counterfeit. "Get out," she said, quiet at first, then louder, her voice climbing into something I'd never heard from her. "Get out of my house, right now. My son needs a wife, not a wounded soldier who thinks a diner is her family. Take them and go." I looked at Trevor. This is the part I'll never forget as long as I live. I looked right at my husband, the father of the 2 babies now starting to wail in the next room, and I said, "Trevor," just his name. 1 word, an entire question. "Are you going to stand up? Are you going to be a man in your own house? Are you going to choose your wife and your children over your mother? One time, this one time, when it actually counts?" And Trevor looked at the table, and he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it, "Maybe just go stay somewhere tonight, Sadie. Let everybody cool off." Somewhere. in a blizzard, with 2-month-old twins. Let everybody cool off. That was the moment the marriage ended, not the divorce papers months later, right there, at that word, somewhere. I stood up and I did not argue and I did not beg, because I have begged for love exactly once in my life, as a small child in a placement that didn't want me, and I swore on everything that I never would again. I went and got my babies. Lorraine was already at the front door. I asked her, calm as I could make my voice, to at least let me get their car seats and my keys, and she said the roads were closed and I wasn't taking her grandchildren out in a car anyway, and she opened the front door to the storm and stood there holding it, waiting for me to walk through it like a queen dismissing a servant. And Trevor watched from the hall and said nothing and did nothing, and I zipped my twins into my coat against my own skin, and I stepped out onto that porch, and I heard the deadbolt turn behind me and the light go dark. The cold when it hit was almost personal. 30 below with the wind coming off that lake. I want to explain what that walk actually was, because people hear she walked 4 blocks and don't understand. On a good day, on a dry sidewalk, I walk fine. You'd never know. But ice is the enemy of a prosthetic. The foot doesn't grip the way a real one does, and you can't feel the ground through it. So black ice under fresh snow is a fall waiting to happen, and I was carrying 2 infants I could not put my hands out to break a fall for. And the cold does something to a residual limb that I can't fully make you feel. The socket, the liner, everything contracts and stiffens, and the nerves that are left, the ones that sometimes still believe the foot is there, they scream. Every single step was a negotiation with my own body. Plant, test, shift the weight, breathe next. 2 babies against my chest, both of them crying, then, worse, so much worse, Micah going quiet, which in that cold is the exact thing you are actually afraid of, because a cold baby that stops crying is a baby that stopped fighting. I talked to them the whole way. I don't even remember what I said. Medic things, probably. The things you say to a soldier so they stay with you. You're okay. I've got you. We're almost there. Stay with me. Don't you quit on me. The same words, the same voice. 1 leg, 4 blocks, 30 below. I kept my body between them and the wind, so I took the cold and they got my heat. I fell once, going off a curb I couldn't see under the snow, and I twisted in the air the way you learn to fall so that I took it on my hip and shoulder instead of on them. And I lay there in the snow for a second with 2 screaming babies and 1 working leg and a prosthetic bent awkwardly under me. And I thought, very clearly, in a voice that sounded like Ramirez 2 mats over, no, not like this, not after all of it. Get up, Sergeant. And I got up. The diner was dark, Sorensen's painted on the front window, the neon off. Locked, of course. It was past 10 and the whole town was shut down for the storm. I got into the little glassed-in vestibule at the door, out of the direct wind, which was the first mercy I'd had in an hour, and I got my phone out with fingers that barely worked, that wouldn't do what I told them. And here's the thing I want you to really hear. I had a choice of exactly 1 phone number, not because I'm pathetic, because when Lorraine walled me off from the Sorensens, and I let her, I'd quietly cut myself off from everyone who might have picked up. But there was 1 number my thumb knew without my brain's help. Not Trevor, not even 911 first, and I'll get to why. My thumb found Eli Sorensen, the 19-year-old I'd covered with my own body while the rockets walked toward us. The 31-year-old man he was now, who worked the plow trucks with his dad and had pulled me aside at my own wedding. This big shy kid grown into a big quiet man and gripped my hand too hard and said, "You ever need anything, ever, day or night, you call me before you call anybody else. I mean it, Sadie. I owe you a debt I can't ever pay back, and it would honor me just to get to try." I called Eli. He picked up on the second ring, and I could barely get the words out because my jaw wasn't working right from the cold. I said, "Eli, I'm at the diner. I've got the babies. I'm locked out, and it's bad. It's real bad." And there was about 1 second of silence, and then Eli Sorensen said, in a voice that went from dead asleep to combat flat in that single second, the exact voice of a man who has been waiting years to repay something and has just been handed the chance, 20 minutes, do not move. Get in the entry, get them on your skin, keep them crying. I'm coming, Sadie, I'm already moving. And he hung up because he was not going to waste 1 breath on talk. He was going to drive. Those 20 minutes were the longest of my life, longer than the white space where my leg used to be. I sat on the floor of that freezing vestibule with my back against the door and both babies tucked inside my coat, skin to skin, and I breathed on them. And I did the thing you do, which is you keep them awake, you keep them mad, because a crying baby is a baby that's still in the fight. I sang to them. I don't sing. I sang anyway, whatever came, and I patted Micah's cold little back and made him cry again on purpose and was glad every time he did. And then, through the whiteout coming up waterfront, 2 headlights. High up, a truck. Gus's big plow truck, the one with the yellow blade on the front, and it came around the corner too fast for the conditions, back end sliding, and stopped hard right in front of the diner, and both doors flew open because Eli hadn't come alone. He'd called his dad on the way, and Gus Sorensen had come out into a 30-below blizzard in his pajama pants and an unzipped parka. And the two of them came across that snow toward me, like they were assaulting a position, fast and silent and total. Eli got to me first. He dropped straight to his knees in the snow, and he didn't ask one single question. He just got his arms around all 3 of us and lifted, and Gus already had the diner key in the lock, and then we were inside, in the dark. And Gus was slapping light switches and cranking the heat as high as it would go. And Marnie was on the phone. They'd woken her too, and she was already in her car, driving in through the storm to us. Eli took Micah from me and held him against his own bare chest inside his coat, this enormous man cradling a baby the size of a loaf of bread, and he was crying and not caring who saw, and he kept saying, low, over and over, "I've got him, I've got you, you're safe, you're both safe now, I've got you." And Gus wrapped me in every coat and every tablecloth in that diner and got hot water running and knelt down in front of me and took my frozen hands inside his 2 enormous ones and said, "Sadie, look at me, you're home. You hear me? Whatever happened, you're home now and you're not going back out. There ever again." And I looked at that man who had walked me down the aisle and at Eli standing there holding my son against his heartbeat. And I finally, after 4 blocks and 3 years and 18 years before that, let myself go all the way down and cry like something in me had broken open. Marnie got there and took over the babies, like the grandmother she'd already long ago decided she was. She checked them over head to toe. She raised 4 kids of her own, warmed them the slow, right way, and after a while she was sure they were okay, cold and outraged, but okay. And when she was sure, she turned to me, and the warm grandmother was gone off her face, and in her place was something I had never once seen on Marnie Sorensen in all the years I'd known her, something as hard and cold and flat as that lake in February. "Who did this?" she said. It was not a question. "Who put you and these babies out in this?" I told them, all of it. The dinner, the thing I'd said about the Sorensens, the word somewhere. Trevor at the window, the deadbolt, the light going off. And I watched it land on Gus Sorensen, who had wept walking me down an aisle, and I watched something in that gentle giant go very still and very dangerous. Gus wanted to get in the truck and drive to Lorraine's house right then. Eli had to physically stop him, put a flat hand on his own father's chest, and it was Eli, the soldier, who said the thing that mattered. "No, Dad, we don't do it mad, and we don't do it in the snow. We do it right. We do it so it counts, and so it holds up." And then Eli looked at me and said, "But we are calling this in tonight, Sadie, because a record of this needs to exist, with a time and a date on it, tonight." And he was right, and I was too wrung out to understand yet how right. Gus called the Lake County Sheriff's non-emergency line, and a deputy actually came out to the diner in the middle of that storm and took my statement, and it went into a report, official, dated, timed. And then Marnie insisted we bundle the babies up and drive them the few blocks to Lakeview, the little hospital in town, and get them checked and documented by a doctor. Cold exposure. The whole workup. So there'd be a medical record, too. I didn't fully understand yet why all that paper would come to matter so much. I understood exactly why a few months later, sitting across a desk from a lawyer in Duluth. That night I slept in the spare room over the diner, The same room I'd slept in when I first came to Two Harbors with a garbage bag and nothing else, with both my babies asleep in a dresser drawer, padded thick with blankets because it was the best crib we could build at midnight in a blizzard. And it was the safest I had felt in 3 years. Now, here's how it went after, because I know that's what you're actually waiting for, and because it's the part that shows you something true about small towns and about the difference between the family that made me and the family that put me out. The Kesslers made 2 mistakes. The first was believing I had no one. The second was believing a town would take their side. Two Harbors is small, a few thousand people, and everyone knows everyone's business by the next morning. And the Sorensens are not just anyone here. Gus has plowed these people's driveways and towed their cars out of ditches for 30 years, half the time waving off the money. Marnie has fed half the town at that diner and buried and married and baptized alongside all of them. Eli is the hometown boy who went to war and came home. And I was, whether Lorraine liked it or not, known in this town as the medic who'd saved Eli. That story had gone around long before I ever married a Kessler. So when word got out, and it got out fast, because a deputy's report and a hospital visit and a diner full of furious Sorensens are not quiet things in a town that size, nobody needed to be told what to think. It came for Lorraine exactly where she lived, which was her reputation, the picture of herself she'd spent a lifetime hanging in every window. The garden club, where my service was a downer, suddenly found its meetings very thin when she hosted. The church where she ran 3 committees went quiet around her, the specific quiet of people who've made up their minds. There was a woman named Pearl who'd been in that garden club with Lorraine for 20 years, and Pearl came into the clinic where I work, made a point of it, and held both my hands at the front desk and said, loud enough for the waiting room, "We all know now, honey, we know what she did, and I want you to know not one of us is standing with her on it." And then Pearl went, and from what I heard, resigned from 2 committees Lorraine chaired. That's how it goes up here. Nobody throws a punch. The whole town just quietly, permanently takes your picture down off the wall, and there's nothing you can do to put it back. And Eli did one thing I will never forget. About a week after, Trevor came to the diner. I wasn't there, but Eli was, and half the town heard the story within the hour. Trevor came in looking for me, wanting to talk. Wanting, I think, for it all to just blow over the way everything had always blown over for Trevor Kessler, his whole soft life. And Eli Sorensen came out from behind the counter, and he didn't yell, because he's a soldier, and the soldiers who've seen the real thing don't need to raise their voices. He just walked up close to Trevor and stood there, and he said, "Level," loud enough for every booth to hear. "That woman put her own body over mine while the rockets came in. She gave up her legs so that I could come home to my mom and my dad. And you stood at a window and watched your mother throw her and your own 2 babies into a blizzard, and you told her to go stay somewhere. So no, you don't get to talk to her. You don't get to set foot in my family's diner. Get out." And Trevor left. And that story went through Two Harbors like a current under the ice. And it was, I think, the exact moment the town's verdict became final and permanent. Then there was the legal part, and I want to walk you through it honestly, because it did not happen overnight the way people want these things to. And I'm not going to sell you a fairy tale where a judge fixes a whole life in one dramatic afternoon. I retained a family law attorney in Duluth, the nearest place for that kind of thing. A sharp, plain-spoken woman who'd handled a lot of cases that looked like mine. I filed for divorce. In Minnesota, that's a petition for dissolution of marriage, and the whole process takes months, not days, with waiting periods and filings and disclosures and back and forth. But here is exactly where all that paper from the storm night earned its keep. The sheriff's report, the hospital record, the deputy's dated statement. Because the fight that actually mattered was never about the marriage. Trevor didn't even contest that. He just went quiet and let his lawyer handle it, the way he let everyone handle everything. The fight that mattered was custody of Elsie and Micah. My lawyer moved early for a temporary custody order, which you can do while the full divorce grinds along in the background. And the standard in Minnesota, like almost everywhere, is the best interests of the child. And when a judge is weighing the best interests of 2 two-month-old infants, a documented, reported incident in which one parent stood by and did nothing while the children were put outside into a life-threatening blizzard is precisely the kind of fact that settles the question. Trevor's own lawyer knew it. The temporary order came through within a few weeks and gave me sole physical custody. The divorce itself finalized about 6 months down the line, and the permanent custody arrangement tracked the temporary one. Primary physical custody to me, with limited and structured visitation for Trevor. And Lorraine, who was not a parent and had no legal standing whatsoever, got from the court exactly what she had earned, which was nothing. Not one right, not 1 hour, no claim on those babies at all. I did not set out to destroy Trevor, and I want to be clear about that, because it matters to me and to the 2 people I'm raising. I'm not in the business of keeping a father from his children out of spite, and my kids will grow up knowing him on terms that keep them safe. But the terms are mine now. The girl with no people turned out to have exactly enough people and exactly enough paper to make certain that no one will ever again lock my children out in the cold. Here's where it all stands now, a few months down the road. I moved back into a little place 2 streets from the diner, close enough to walk on a good leg day. Elsie and Micah have more family than any 2 babies I have ever met in my life. Marnie is grandma, full stop, no qualifiers, and Gus built them a double. Cradle out in his workshop with his own 2 hands, sanded smooth, and Eli comes by after his plow shifts, smelling like diesel and cold air to hold whichever twin is fussing, and he's better at settling them than I am, which he does not ever let me forget. I went back to my work at the clinic. I still have my VA check, which was always mine every month, which means Lorraine never actually held the power over me she believed she held. I stayed for love, not for money, and the day the love was proven a counterfeit, there was nothing left to keep me. And the same town that quietly turned its back on Lorraine turned toward me and my babies with an open hand. Casseroles on the porch, bags of hand-me-down snowsuits, 100 people who look at Elsie and Micah like they belong to the whole town, which up here they sort of do. Trevor sees the twins on his court schedule. He came alone to the last handoff and stood on my porch, and I noticed the symmetry of it. A Kessler standing on a porch in front of a locked door. And he told me he was sorry, and I think this time he actually meant it, in the small, late way that Trevor means things. I told him I forgave him, and I did, honestly, because carrying that particular rock 1 more mile wasn't worth what it was costing me to hold it. But forgiving a man is not the same as forgetting what he watched happen, and it is a very long road from there to ever trusting him again. And Trevor knows he will not, for the rest of his life, be handed one single thing of mine to protect. Lorraine has never apologized, and I've stopped expecting she ever will. Last I heard, she'd started driving to a church 2 towns over, where nobody knows the story yet, which is a small and lonely and very familiar kind of exile that I can almost, on my most generous mornings, find it in me to feel for. There's a booth in the back corner of Sorensen's diner where I sit most mornings now with a coffee going cold, the twins in a carrier on the bench beside me, in the warm, in the family that drove into a blizzard for me without asking me a single question first. And some mornings I think about that porch and that deadbolt and Trevor's face behind the glass, and how completely certain Lorraine had been that a girl with no people could just be set out in the cold and forgotten by everyone. She had the whole thing exactly backwards, right to the end. It was never me who had no family. It was her, a woman who owned a son and mistook the owning for love, and who ended up standing alone in a big, quiet house on 3rd Avenue while the woman she threw into the snow sat 4 blocks away in a warm diner, surrounded by more love than that house had ever once held. The cold has never scared me. I have been colder than any storm Lake Superior can throw. What I know now, that I did not know standing on that porch, is that your family isn't the people who are supposed to come for you. It's the people who actually do. When the deadbolt turns and the porch light dies and you've got 1 call left in a frozen phone. Mine came in a plow truck with a yellow blade 20 minutes after the worst moment of my life, and not once, not one single time, have they ever made me feel like I owed them a thing for it. So here's the question I asked you to hold on to at the start, and now I'll ask it straight out. When your worst night comes, and everybody gets one, who is your 20 minutes later? Tell me their name down in the comments, not the people who were supposed to show up for you, the one who actually did, when it was cold and it was late and it counted. I read every one of these, and I'll be honest with you, they're my favorite part of doing this. If this story warmed something in you tonight, leave a like so it reaches the next person sitting out in their own kind of cold, and subscribe, because I've got another one waiting for you next week. And stay warm out there. I mean that from the bottom of my heart.